these kind of ideas and dreams. And so as I started going through this book, started developing policies, procedures for our ministry just to bring health to it. I didn't go to school for ministry. I went to school for education. I got my master's in educational leadership. So my goal was to lead a ministry as well as I could, knowing that theology comes for the rest of my life, and really based everything on creating a space where we could deliver the gospel to kids as safely as possible, as efficiently as possible, caring for our volunteers as well as we could. And so those were really kind of the opening goals 9 years ago in running with Providence Kids. And so over time, those policies developed, and they got more and more efficient. They got easier for our volunteers to streamline and to be able to really, it made it accessible for anybody, but it also gave us enough teeth to be able to say, hey, let's pause your application process and take a look at your life. Are you known? Are you not known? And so as the ministry developed, Jeff called one day and said, hey, I hear good things about what y'all are doing. Here's what I'm trying to do, put together. Do you want to come on board? And so that really catapulted us into becoming ECAP accredited, or not accredited, but ECAP compliant, as we're working toward these standards along the way. And so over the past handful of months, we've been going through the accreditation process. And just kind of give everybody a reference point, 2 weeks ago, we had some auditors come in and kind of complete one of the final pieces of the puzzle, so that on our end, we're done. We've handed everything over to ECAP to say yay or nay to our ministry. And so we'll hopefully hear back from that in a few months as to what the final verdict is. But that's kind of where we are now. So that's a real quick 9-year look. Specifically, I know everybody's here to hear about this accreditation process and what it takes and what it took us. And so I'll be able to hit some highlights along the way. We started this process, and I think one of the things that really helped is ECAP actually lays everything out for you. They tell you, hey, go get a team of people. And if you're developing a team of people, here's some of the people that you'll need, whether that is the child protection like the coordinator who's going to be part of this. They're going to be the lead. So the child safety coordinator is taking charge. They're looking over the standards, helping come up with the plan, and then a team of people. And so we brought in other ministries, student ministry. We have an executive pastor, and so he was very aware of the process the entire time. And we started building up this team of people, because it is very difficult, if not impossible, to do this as one person and continue to run Sunday mornings, as much as you already are. And so this kind of adds to it, but you need a team of people. I recommend multiple ministries. That's what we do. We had a lot of insight, which gives you kind of a view from different angles of how do these standards apply to our church. Because the standards are beautiful. They are able to take a church that is 10 people and a church that is 10,000 people and apply the same standards, but you do it in your own context and very differently, but all in an effort to keep kids safe. And so they really are a beautiful tool that you can use to help really bolster and secure your ministry. So the ECAP self-study, we applied. We went through the steps of application, which are things like, can you prove you have insurance? There's a lot of just kind of paperwork things. Who are your points of contact? Kind of just setting the ground. And then you get a self-study. And so this self-study really, it helps lay out the entire plan for all that you're going to be doing. And it tells you to start off making a team. Next step, you're going to look at all of your ministries where you care for minors. And so as you are kind of looking through them, gathering paperwork for each ministry, whether that's student ministries, policy and procedure, or you have a preschool at your campus, or you have the kids ministry, or your child care piece, whatever it is, you have all these documents, you're just grouping everything together. You get, I think maybe my favorite piece of the whole process is you have this document that keeps coming in every so periodically, and it's just it's a list. It's the order of everything that you need to be doing, and it tells you here's where you are, but here's what's next. And then it's just this really good encouragement that as you turn in one thing, that arrow moves down and you get an update that says, no, now you're here, working your way down the list. And so it's just encouragement from ECAP to keep going. After we inventoried all of our programs with minors, we took a look at all of the documents that we use. And I think originally I thought, oh, okay, our documents are going to be things like background check and our sexual abuse awareness training, things like that. But really there's lots of documents like if there's an incident, what report are you doing for that? Is there a document for your policy acknowledgements? So at Providence, all of our volunteers have been signing off saying that they understand the policy that they've gone through. And we had a whole stack of those, and they were laying in a drawer somewhere in case we ever needed them. And so we started organizing that. And so we really just took a look at all of the different documents that we had across all of the ministries. And then the next step was this is where the bulk of the work really came in. So kind of prepared for this. And then we took our policies that we had, and we took the ECAP standards, and we just laid them out on a table side by side and said, okay, if the standard says that we need to address the concern that a child should never be alone with an adult, do we have that in our policy? And then do we have it in across the different policies? If the standard says that we need to have some sort of system where we're monitoring what goes on in the classrooms, do we say that anywhere in the policies? And if the standard says that this is a particular way that we train people, do we actually do that? And so we just compared really apples to apples and oranges to oranges, and we laid out both side by side and said, okay, where are we doing well? Where are our gaps? And the ECAP standards showed us where our gaps were. We took the bulk of our time coming up with trying to see clearly where ECAP addressed things that either churches don't think of, or places where we have just tried, but there's maybe a better option. There's maybe a better best practice than what we were doing. And so we just laid them out and spent most of our time going back and forth between those. We found out that there are overlaps. At Providence, our kids ministry had a policy and our student ministry had a policy. And while we cooperate and we work together, there was a lot of overlap of those policies, but they were uniquely different also. And so things about the way that we onboarded volunteers was slightly different in Providence Kids than it was in students. And so we really tried to align where we saw these minute differences. And we ended up coming up with a child protection policy that is good no matter what ministry you're in. And that's the way that you onboard somebody, the actual abuse or response policy, the what training any worker with a minor needs to go through. And so there's these unified rules that everybody has to play by. And then there's particulars, right? So our kids ministry has very unique situations that we don't find in student ministry. I hope we're not changing diapers in students ministry, but we have it in Providence Kids. And so we are going to address that. Students, they have overnight events, and we don't in Providence Kids. And so there's just unique tailored things to the ministries, and those are where our individual policies come into play. So after we filled in the gaps, after we started unifying our policies, we started training people. And so with the differences came a handful of trainings, some extra documentation. I think the number one question that we continue to ask ourselves, and really that ECAP made us ask ourselves, is if something were to happen in our ministry, if there's an abuse allegation, could we prove that that person was trained not to do that? Could we prove that they had agreed that they would abide by the rules that prevented them from doing that? And I believe that for 8 years, we would have said, "Oh yeah, totally. They were trained. We told them not to." And really, what ECAP has securely put in our place is evidence that this person, that we have documentation. It's no longer our word against them. We have evidence that says that shows, not even just says, but shows this person violated the rules that they had agreed to. We have set this up to be a safe place, and this person violated that, and it's no longer no longer a he said she said game. And so that to me is one of the most just restful, secure things that ECAP has helped us to see and to take care of. We had extra documentation that we needed our volunteers to go through, and so we held one large training, and then we trained them on some of the new aspects, some of the new things that were coming up, and we documented that training as well. Of course, we introduced them to new ways of doing things and more efficient ways, even if it's not right at first efficient, because we're all changing and nobody likes change. But we ended up getting to a point where everybody was on board, and they were on board not because they love policy and not because they love to make changes, but they were on board because what it was doing was creating a safer place for our kids. And as long as we communicated that to people, there was zero pushback, because everybody is in it for that reason. You know, at the end of the day, and I believe Jeff would agree with this, but at the end of the day, ECAP accreditation is not our goal. It is awesome, and it is a fantastic tool that helps us get to the goal, but the goal itself is actually child protection. We want our kids to be safe. If they're in an unsafe place, they can't hear the gospel, and it's as simple as that. And so ECAP is this amazing guide and tool to help us get to a place where kids can safely hear the gospel. And so that's really the driving force behind it all. After the training, after people had gotten comfortable with some of the new things, we got everything together, everything that we had done. And the next part of the self-study is this online documentation. So you kind of submit some documents, you know, not the confidential things, but you're submitting documents, and then ECAP takes those documents and does a remote audit. And they basically just look over your policies and procedures. They actually did what we did at the very beginning. They laid the policies out with the ECAP standards and said, is Providence aligning with the ECAP standards, or are there still gaps? And so 2 remote people who are not affiliated with Providence Church looked at that and said, all right, it seems to line up, but do you do what you say you do? And so after this online audit where we had just submitted documents, they actually came into Providence 2 weeks ago, stayed for the weekend, got to observe a Sunday morning, got to look in all the rooms or at our security cameras or wherever, had pretty much open access to anything that we do. And they were making sure that we actually put in place things that we just have in writing. And so they could verify that those things are true. And so that's where we are now. We are, we just had the on-site audit, and we have the opportunity to kind of talk about it a little bit here.
Jeremy, that's great. Super helpful. We've got some questions coming in, and then I posted a few things in the chat. You know, we're actually recruiting auditors across the country. And so if you meet the requirements and you're interested in serving as an auditor, it's just kind of on an as needed basis. It's a 1099. It's not a full-time position, but it's an independent contractor. But look at the link I just posted in the chat. Jeremy, you also served for another audit. Can you mention a little bit, just from an audit perspective, if that was helpful to you at Providence?
Invaluable. So we had the opportunity to audit another organization this summer, and it gave me a look at and it was an organization that isn't a church, it's a Christian organization, but we got to look at their policies, procedures, and the way that they operate and their philosophies, and really got to go in and see how they create safe places for kids, completely blindfolded, which was pretty great because you get, as an auditor, you get to kind of keep your church hat on and get to remember what's going on in your church, but you also get to sneak peek at the inner workings of another organization. And so being able to talk with those leaders, being able to see what they've developed, their team is enormous. It's a national organization. So they have organization that we don't have at what used to be a smaller church, and depending on who you are, it is a small church, and depending on who you are, it's a large church. But we got this inside look at an organization, and it just helped us either fine tune some of what we did, or these new ideas of, oh my gosh, what if we could also do this? And it was just great as an auditor to be able to go into an organization, see what they do, and cheer them on for the areas that they're doing really well. Also see where some of their pitfalls are and kind of compare that, take that part of the job and apply this over to Providence and see if we have any of the same gaps. And absolutely invaluable to be an auditor and go through the process as well.
Maybe you could just reiterate for us, a lot of the child protection program before you learned about the ECAP standards was already in place. But one of the big things, and we're seeing this with other ministries, is the documentation that you need. So, a common one that we see is, I might do reference checks on a staff member or a volunteer, but maybe we haven't been documenting the fact that we call so-and-so and ask these certain questions. Could you just reiterate a little bit about the documentation piece and how that might be important?
Absolutely. As far as importance, I think it's crucial. I don't think I understood how crucial it was until at every turn we asked that question of how could we prove this? If something went awry, how could we prove what we had already done? And so I think the importance piece is just, it's fundamentally crucial that you be able to do that just to protect your own organization, your own self from the harm that can come in a fallen Genesis 3 world. As far as the documentation that went into this, we knew that we had, we did sexual abuse awareness training with Ministry Safe. And so all of those certificates are just they live on their website. We did our background checks through Checker. That all just kind of lives there. And then we had, like I said, my organization, which is put it in the bottom drawer of a piece of paper that the volunteers had signed saying that they acknowledged that they received and understand the policy and procedures. And so we just had a whole stack of those from our volunteers, in case that ever came up. Wasn't thinking too much about how fast could we find that if somebody asked for it. That one was, that's where my team comes into play. And so those were I would say our main 3 documents. What we didn't have was any proof of the interview process that we go through. And so I'll just kind of explain a little bit about Providence, the intake process, if that's all right. And so we, to become a volunteer at Providence, you need to be in process of membership at Providence Church. What that means is that these people who are coming to Providence need to join Providence. We have a pretty strict process there. They go through a class, 3-hour class there. They have a sit down with an elder, one-on-one interview with an elder before the elder signs off saying, yes, they believe what we believe. They've been baptized. They are a follower of Jesus and they're committed to this church. I'll sign off on them. Once all that happens, they can come join a ministry that serves minors. They come and they do another interview with us, because just because the elder knows them doesn't mean we know them. And so every volunteer goes through this interview process where we want to hear about their heart for kids, about their heart for the Lord. We want to be able to share what our ministry does and what it doesn't do. We want to talk to them about how often they serve and just all the details that go into serving in a kids ministry. After this interview process, they get a slew of emails, background check, sexual abuse awareness training, things like that. They serve. They come and they shadow for a couple of weeks before ever being released on their own into a classroom with other adults. And so they're kind of the third party there. And I always tell them, you're welcome to jump in and help out with a kid, but you're at this point, you don't have to. You can sit in the shadows and just observe if you want to learn what it's like. And so from there, that's when they really become a volunteer after those few shadow weeks. And so this lengthy process that we have, and we had no evidence at all except that we had run a background check. And if you know the statistics on background checks, you know that they are not enough is what they are. They are not enough. And so if 10% of abusers are ever identified, that means 90% are not, and your background check shows you absolutely nothing unless they're actually caught. So that's why the interview process to us is so important. And so really what ECAP helped us to do and to help us to document is we now have a worker application where we ask a series of questions. It takes a solid 10 minutes to fill out probably, which in my opinion goes to show the how bad do they want to serve in Providence kids, because I don't want anybody reluctantly serving in our kids ministry. I want people who love being there. So they're willing to fill out a 10-minute application. And then that actually gives us content to go into the interview with. And so they fill out, we ask them some pretty pointed questions. And if there are flags that come up, let's talk about those things. Just because this thing happened in your past doesn't necessarily mean that it excludes them from serving in our ministry. It might, but it depends on what that thing was. And so lots going on in this interview process. Now we have documentation for it. Now we have documentation that we have sent out as a reference check. And so we have references that have emailed us back, and it's a point of conversation that we can come back to over and over again in the interview process. And so all of those things add to the documentation. The majority of it's all online. It's run through our database. We have all of those things that used to just be ethereal conversations that we know happened and no one else knows that they happened. And now we have something to go back to, and it gives us a lot of confidence moving forward.
One of the resources that we've developed, which you can have your own code of conduct for workers, but we created one that you can use or adapt to your own purposes, but check that out in the link. And Jeremy said something in the screening process that he described. He mentioned the importance of the membership piece. Now, some of you may not be at a church where there is a membership process like that, but one of the ECAP indicators does require a waiting period before you'd have a volunteer serve with kids. And so that could be as little as a week. Now, we recommend that be somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 months if you can get to know that person. The whole idea, right, is that you don't want someone walking in off the street and being able to serve with kids. And so however you can do that in your ministry context, do it. Jeremy's process at his church with a membership process is fantastic and is also similar to what we do at our church here in Jacksonville. Jeremy, talk a little bit, and this can be a little bit controversial, but what do you do with the pornography question in screening your workers? That was the source of much debate with our legal team as we reviewed. And so we provide some recommendations, but we don't require that as a question in screening. Can you talk about what your church does there?
You bet. We do ask the question, have you viewed pornography? And if you have, how recently was it? It's a question that I think gives people a little bit of a pause, and I think it's off-putting because that's not a common conversation in a lot of places. But we know that that's really prevalent in this society and today's day and age. And so we ask that question, and really it's one of, I think, probably a dozen, maybe 15 questions that the questions are all listed out. And if you say yes to any of them, what it does is it introduces another question where you can then get a chance to explain it. And every single one of them says, this does not exclude you from ministry. Your answer does not exclude you from ministry. And so we want to hear from our people. And so it's a chance to open up the conversation for people who are hurt, people who are stuck in sin, people who are struggling. I think one of my favorite conversations, I promise I'll come back to it, but one of my favorite conversations that I had with a guy who was serving in our kids ministry is he came up to me broken, just visibly broken, and he said, "Hey, I need to step out of the ministry." And I said, "Okay, what's going on?" And he said, I fell and I looked at pornography, and I don't think I'd need to still serve because of that. And I said, "Man, I'm so sorry. Thank you for telling me. Thank you for being honest about it. I'm sorry. Let's pray about that." Prayed about that, and then got to explain to him there is a big difference between somebody who is struggling and struggling well, and somebody who's hiding what's going on. And so the fact that he's able to come to me and say, "Hey, I have this sin issue and I'm working on it, and maybe I need to step out." I said, maybe you do. And I'm not going to tell you yes or no unless the pornography has to do with children. That totally different story. Yes, step out and quickly. But the conversation needs to be an open door where people can come to us with their hurts, because we are a church, and the cross is a big cross that encompasses all of that. If it was a hidden sin and it came out later that this was a thing, then yeah, we have more to talk about than just that particular sin. And so really we ask the question specifically so that it starts the conversation. We start the question so that people can be identified as, "Hey, we need to be praying for this person. There are resources to be able to help you." But we ask the question about pornography in our questions. We ask the question, have you ever been convicted or charged with any form of abuse inside of these interviews? And so I'll give you a little bit of a sneak peek. As we're doing these interviews, one of the constant things that happens is these volunteers who are coming into our ministry, they are just so thankful that we take the taboo out of this. And so they come to us relieved, is really the best word for it, that they can be open and honest and not shamed, and that they feel that this is a place where they can be restored and find help, and not have to continue living in secret, not continue dodging this question, but it's just brought out. And so it's been a really good process to be able to bring all these things to light. And then even with the conversation of abuse, I've had more people sit in my office with tears in their eyes when we get to this part about, and we explain, we are doing all of this in order to protect our children from abuse. And the number, and I think I can only recall one guy, and it's been dozens of women who have said, "Thank you for starting this conversation, and thank you for that is your reason, because that's my story." And so at Providence, I think that we identified more people. I mean, we know the statistics that it's 1 in 4 people have been abused as a child. And so when you start the conversation and when you are able to break through this taboo darkness and you bring light into it, it is overwhelmingly relieving that they feel heard, they felt seen, they feel cared for, and that's where ministry happens. And so we absolutely want to continue those conversations. If you're not having those conversations, my challenge to you is ask the questions. There's a lot of joy. There's a lot of good that can come when you bring light into dark places.
Jeremy, that's super helpful and encouraging. Obviously, I think that works really, really well in a church context because there's a shepherding component to of which you just described, leading towards redemption. And so praise God for that. Of course, leadership needs to make that decision, whether that's a topic that you take on and ask that question. But it's helpful to hear what you all do so that we can all learn from it. Big picture really quick here. We're talking about the ECAP child safety standards. And there's really, just to kind of give you a framework of what does that entail. You can see Brigham, I think, posted in the chat, but big picture, you've got governance, you've got child safety operations that would include, transportation policies, check-in and check-out policies for younger children, ratios of adults to minors, those types of things. And then, of course, you've got screening. We've been talking about screening and training, and then response. And when we talk about response, we're not evaluating how you have responded to an abuse situation. We're evaluating your preparation for if you have to respond to a situation. And so actually, if you email us, we've got a resource that we've developed recently, will not be available on our website, but in developing your own response plan. So let me ask you a couple more questions, Jeremy, about this process. Go to training. Forgive me if I missed it, but one of the things that is certainly not required by ECAP, but that you've decided as a church is to have your entire congregation go through abuse prevention training. Is that right? Tell us more.
Yes and no. Did not require our entire congregation to go through this. We opened it up to them. Yes, absolutely. Wow, that'd be something if we required it for membership. All right. So for our congregation, what because of the conversations that we were having, where people were opening up to us and saying that that's my world, also because we know that the world outside of our church especially is a dark place, and we want our people to be prepared for that. Kind of had the realization in thinking through these things that the people who were equipped to recognize and respond and report abuse were the people in our kids ministry and in our youth ministry, in our students ministry. And so we wanted to expand that. We had already had that conversation about curriculum, and we want to equip and train parents in the same way that we want to equip our teachers. And why would parents who are with our kids 167 hours not have the same curriculum that our teachers had with only 1 hour a week access to these kids? And so we opened up a lot of things to parents, and inside of that was our sexual abuse awareness training. The goal behind that was that whether parents were at church, whether parents were on the soccer field or in the grocery store or in the car pickup line, wherever they were, they would be able to, through this training, they would be able to recognize and respond, report abuse, know how to handle this, and they would know what it looks like for grooming to happen. And so we opened it up to the church. We kind of a bold move, had some good conversations with leadership about this because it doesn't communicate very well. It's not the favorite Instagram post of the day to like sexual abuse awareness training. And so we had some good conversations about it, and we opened it up, and the response was great. Again, with parents saying, thank you for doing this. We didn't even know that this was a thing. We didn't know what to be looking for. And so what we did was, in our kids ministry training that we were doing for all of our volunteers, we just said, hey, for the 2 hours before this ministry training, there's going to be sexual abuse awareness training. And so we're going to create a conversation about this. And you, church at large, are welcome to join us and be part of this. Kind of roundaboutly, we also thought, man, if they see the value in this, maybe then we get some new volunteers serving, and it happened. We got some new volunteers serving in our kids ministry because they were able to come to this, see value in it, and go, oh, I want to be part of that ministry. They're taking great care and going to great lengths for this. And so it was kind of a side benefit of that. But yeah, we opened up the conversation to the entire church, and we've done that for I think 2 years now. I think right after COVID, we might have started that, and find a lot of value in it.
Jeremy, here's a question we've got about policies and procedures. First of all, just quickly reference the link again in the chat to the self-study. And when you click on that, you're going to see a number of checklists. One checklist in particular is oriented specifically to policies and procedures. So this question here, Jeremy, is how long should the creation of policies and procedures take in the accreditation process? And I understand that might vary for different organization types, but how about your situation?
Sure. If you are starting with no policies and procedures, it should take very little time to get something on the ground immediately. If you don't have policies and procedures at all, and I've talked with churches who didn't have anything, you're not adhering very well to John 5, where no, John 10, where God is the good shepherd, and he's called us to protect our people. He's called us to lead our people well. And so he has set the example for this. And if you don't have policies and procedures, you don't know how to respond to any situation, much like an abuse situation, yeah, but also just to any situation. If a kid is sick, if there's disruption in the classroom. And so if you don't have anything, I would say get something on the ground immediately. You can find some examples online and tweak them to fit your context. If you already have some policies and procedures and you're a small church, I think that refining the policies and procedures to get to where they match up with ECAP standards will probably take you, again, all depending on how many hours you can devote to it. But I would say that it should take you no less than a month to really think through solutions on where you are and where ECAP standards are calling you to. And so I think if you're a larger church, it comes with potentially a larger team, but the other thing that it comes with is a lot more governance and hoops to jump through, is my guess. And so, man, that is a difficult question. I would say the more hoops that you have, drag that time out a little bit. The less hoops you have to jump through, you can scale that back a little bit. But I would say that no church or organization should spend less than a month in making sure that what they are aiming to do matches up with the highest standards in the nation, which are ECAP standards.
Yeah, so the child protection policies and procedures are really the backbone of your whole program, right? Just using a slightly different language there to describe that process. You don't necessarily need an attorney to write those for you. That would be, you could do that. That would be a very expensive option.
Mm-hmm.
No offense to any attorneys on the call, but you can draft those and then maybe just have an attorney review those. And then also meeting ECAP standards, you would want to have your leadership, whether that's a deacon board, elder board, whoever the governing board of your organization is, board of directors, to approve those as a matter of kind of checks and balances. And of course, we have boards approve those also for sustainability. What do I mean by that? Well, those policies and procedures represent some cost and resources that need to be dedicated to keeping your child protection program going. And so having the board approve those is also helpful in keeping your program going. Another similar question on policies and procedures is, would you recommend separate policies and procedures for kids ministry versus a student ministry? I'm curious to see what you would say, Jeremy. I think my tendency would be try to keep those all together, generally speaking, unless you have multiple divisions. Like if you've got a church and a Christian school under one legal entity, you might have separate policies and procedures. What do you all do?
Yes and no. So we have one policy that is the child protection policy. doesn't matter what ministry you serve in, these things are true. We have a zero tolerance for abuse. That's across the board, all ministries. We have a responsibility to report across the board, all ministries. We are going to onboard our volunteers in this specific way across the board. We are going to have these particular trainings for all volunteers, no matter what age you're serving with, kids or students. Those things are true. Here's the way we're going to respond and report abuse. Here are, if you have a question about it, here are the people that you're going to reach out to. Those things are true across the board, no matter what ministry you serve in, no matter what age you serve with. We have so that is our blanket child protection policy. Inside and separate of that, we do have a children's more procedures. You have policies that are how you do things, but procedures are like the nitty gritty, go do these things. And so I guess you can think of it as what we do and how we do it, but the how we do it, definitely different things. And so I think I touched on that a little bit, of just kind of talking about students are going to have overnight trips and they have transportation needs to these different places that children's ministry doesn't have. Children's ministry is going to have younger care for kids, whether that's diapering or helping in restrooms. The discipline is going to look a little bit different. Here, you're going to have a very gentle conversation with kids. And here you can have a little bit tougher conversation with teenagers of, hey, this is a place where everybody needs to hear about Jesus. And if you're being disruptive and they can't hear about Jesus, then we need to figure out another solution here. So we have different procedure documents, but we have a general child protection policy that applies across both of them.
Super helpful. Thank you. Someone's asking, where did the standards come from? So I'll answer that very quickly. We followed a roadmap, which is common in standards creation. So, standards are the basis of an accreditation program. ACSI walked with us through that process early on, as they have their own standards in education. But you're going to find standards and accreditation processes in other industries. Beyond education, of course, elementary education and higher education, but law enforcement, hospitals, a number of industries all have standards and accreditation. So we followed a similar roadmap. And if you look on the standards webpage, you can see what we did is we invited experts from all aspects of the industry or the child protection field. Earlier on in our webinar, I mentioned the 3 practitioners that we had on the team. Of course, Jeremy was there representing a church perspective. We had an associate head of school for a Christian school in California, and we had a camp risk manager, but we also had experts in child protection. We invited the insurance companies to engage with us. We believe that they were important stakeholders. We had a forensic nurse, a police investigator, a police captain, and someone who also represented the victim perspective through an attorney that we had on the team. So all of those team members are listed on our website, as well as the 4 attorneys that conducted the legal review after that. And of course, Brigham and I, we live in this world, so we were kind of a part of the process to some degree as well. So that's a little bit of how the standards were created. Let's ask the question about the child safety coordinator, Jeremy. What does the child safety coordinator do, and how did you implement that role in your church?
Child safety coordinator is really the person who's leading the charge. They are going to know the standards inside and out more than anybody else. They're one of the leads on knowing what to do in any situation, knowing who to contact in a situation. They're the person who, if there is ever an allegation, that they would, they're the person kind of sounding the alarm that this team of people who's already been identified in the response plan, because it's so much better to just, if something happens, to have something to fall back on and say, oh yeah, we know how to handle this because we wrote this in the really calm time, so that in the hectic time, we knew exactly what we needed to do. And so the child safety coordinator is the person who is spearheading this pursuit of child safety. They are as much as possible, they should be involved in at least the kids or students ministry. It's great if that person can also be in leadership. If they're not in leadership, then you want somebody on the team who is in leadership, somebody who can go to bat at a staff meeting to be able to do that. And so child safety coordinator can be a volunteer, but they definitely need to be involved in the ministry. They are the person who, because they know the standards and they are immersing themselves more maybe than the others as far as readily knowing what the standard says, they're the person who everybody else can turn to and say, hey, we have this question, here's our policy, but we're not sure that it lines up exactly. Where can we find that ECAP standard, to indicator number 13, and what do we do about that? And so they're really the go-to person to help move the process along.
I'll just add a couple more comments to that. So the child safety coordinator doesn't have to be the administrator building out your child protection program, but it can be. And sometimes it can be helpful because the person's intimate with the build out of the child protection program, right? But it's not required. If you have a church that, or even school that has multiple campuses, you really need to have a child safety coordinator according to ECAP standards on every campus. Now, that doesn't mean that they have to be there anytime children are being served within the ministry, but they need to be unencumbered by other responsibilities, which is tricky to do. So the idea is that they're really focused on oversight of the child protection program. I'll just use this as a moment to mention, when we created ECAP, we were trying to solve two problems. Number one, we wanted to help ministry leaders know what to do to keep kids safe, and that's the standards. The second problem that we realized is that oftentimes ministry leaders would start something and not keep it going as intended. No offense, but ministry is busy. You're on the treadmill of ministry and there's tons to do and oftentimes insufficient resources. And so one of the problems we realized is that a church, a school, or ministry would even have policies and procedures. Maybe they even built out their child protection program, but after a period of time, maybe after a leadership transition, things weren't operating the way they were intended. And so the accreditation program is intended to solve really a management issue to make sure that the child protection program is operating as intended. That child safety coordinator is an internal solution to help with that management problem, to make sure that someone's overseeing the child safety operations when kids are in the custody of the ministry. So there we answered a couple of questions just really quickly though, but that's the child safety coordinator, and that's kind of an ECAP specific indicator that we require for accreditation. And there's more information on our website about the child safety coordinator and how that person can help keep your child safety program operational. Of course, they should also be listed in your response plan. So if you get an allegation of abuse or an incident comes up, they will probably most likely be involved or consulted potentially, depending on who your child safety coordinator is and given the situation that's come up. Just as a reference point, when we talk about abuse, we think of abuse that might be internal, something that happened at your ministry location, but also remember abuse can happen externally, right? You might have a Sunday school worker or a teacher in your Christian school that's observed some sort of sign of abuse in the ministry context and may be a mandatory reporter. So just think about that related to your child safety coordinator and responding to abuse. Here's another question, Jeremy. Oh, I guess that question is actually for me. Sorry. Once you're accredited, how often are the audits to maintain accreditation? That's annual. So you would start by applying for candidacy status. We're going to charge $300 to apply for accreditation. You're in candidacy status until you complete the audit. And then the auditors submit a report to the ECAP Council, and it's the council that's made up of other ministry leaders, kind of like you, would vote to award accreditation as kind of a peer-based system. And so that's the ECAP Council. You can learn more about that from our website, but there's a number of committees, including a standards and an accreditation committee that serve on the council, and that's an annual renewal in order to maintain accreditation. I'm throwing a lot of information at you. This is also available on the accreditation landing page, but it's an annual renewal of accreditation, but it's every other year, depending on the type of organization you're at, but every other year that we'd come and do an audit on site. That off year, so after 12 months, would be just a remote audit. So our auditors are merely looking at documentation and your annual improvement plan to maintain accreditation. Here's another question that I'll take really quickly. How would we work with a missions organization? So we will only accredit US-based ministries and US-based operations. That's because the standards that have been created work with US state laws and US territory. And you can pray for this as we start to make these plans. We intend, Lord willing, to expand into Canada and Mexico in the future. We would create a sister kind of council in those countries, and we would adapt the standards to the nation state laws of the country we're expanding to. So we're already paving the way in Canada, having conversations with potential board members in Canada, and then that board would lead the efforts to create an adaptation of the standards to Canadian law using the same accreditation model that we've built here in the US. Here, Jeremy, is a question for you. How do you provide online training for your volunteers or only in person? How do you prove if they've done the training online?
Great question. So as far as training on our policies and procedures in particular, that's all done in person. It's done in part when they come in for their interview and we go through the policy and procedure with them. That interview process, just kind of for everybody's knowledge, is about 30 to, I don't know, almost an hour sometimes, depending on what all we get into, 30 minutes to an hour. But it covers the application that they filled out and the questions that they have there. It covers the policy and procedure. It covers their testimony. And so it's a pretty lengthy process, but incredibly necessary. That's the thing that we've been doing for 9 years, knowing exactly who's in our ministry, no questions. People don't show up to a classroom that we kind of scratch our head and go, how'd they get through the gates? There's other training, for example, the sexual abuse awareness training. And so one of the pieces that we use for that is Ministry Safe. Ministry Safe offers really great training on identifying predatory behaviors, for knowing how to respond, and that if you see something, you should say something. It's a great tool to be able to use. We did not feel adequate to try and do that training ourselves. And so that's one of the things that we've utilized Ministry Safe for. And there's others, Protect My Ministry and others that offer sexual abuse awareness training, but that one is done online. That one is, it comes with a certificate. I believe it's about an hour and a half worth of videos and a quiz at the end of that based on the videos. And then from that quiz, you get a certificate. And so that certificate is one of the ways that we know that they've done that training online. Another one that I've seen, we started to implement it and we ended up not going down the road, but might at a future point, is Ministry Grid. And I believe is that done by Lifeway, Jeff?
That's right.
That's right. So Ministry Grid, you can host your own videos. So if we wanted to provide online training for our volunteers, we could make videos, host them on here, and then you can assign these videos, and it keeps track of how many people have seen how much of this video. And so you can verify that they have watched all the video. You can offer a quiz or some sort of documentation at the end of it to be able to verify that they've actually done that. So those are tools that you use in the process toward accreditation.
I think you just answered this other question we received, but it's Ministry Safe's abuse prevention training that you used for your congregation as well, right?
That is correct.
Okay, good. And then I just shared in the link, there's a sample training video that you can use provided to ECAP for free from Telios Teaches. Jeremy, tell us about the recommended ratio of adult workers per children. How do you handle that?
Well, if you go by the Texas state guidelines, I think it's somewhere along the lines of 24 3-year-olds to 2 teachers. We like our volunteers. We want to keep our volunteers happy. We want to show that we care for our volunteers, and so we go less than that. Every age has an incrementally different ratio, right? So infants, I have a really strict 3-to-1 ratio for infants. Never one person by themselves, but a 3-to-1 ratio means that you can hold one baby in each arm and you can rock the other one with your foot. And so with, in one classroom, you can have 6 babies, and that's going to cap you out safely. The more volunteers you can have in there, obviously, the better. In the next stage up, what we call our walkers, once they start walking around the age of 1, we can go up to about 10 to 1 in there. That really maxes them out, though. You're talking 21-year-olds, 20 walkers with 2 teachers is a bit much, and so we always try and put 3 volunteers in that room. From there, it can kind of scale up. We average, and a lot of this is going to be based on your classroom size as well. But I would say that ages 3 and higher are going to average, based on our classroom sizes, between 15 and 18 for 2 teachers. Again, that's going to be really dependent on your building facility, but in an effort to care for your volunteers, in an effort to keep your volunteers and not have to always need volunteers, the lower the ratio that you can provide, the better.
Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, great question. Thank you. Here's another question about church plants. So, church plants are often small, right, with little resources, and you'll need to think carefully about whether you and when you should offer childcare at your church plant. Obviously, we recognize that church plants aren't going to be accredited immediately. You got to get started someplace, but I would start by at least doing basic screening and training as a place to start. One of the attorneys that we've been collaborating with said, if your church isn't prepared to have kind of a bare minimum child protection program, then you shouldn't even do Sunday school, which is often a hard sell, especially for ambitious new church planners and pastors and ministry leaders. But to just carefully think through that. So it begs the question, though, what is the bare minimum? And we often don't like to use that kind of language when we think about a child protection program, but I would definitely start with reading On Guard. I would start by screening and training all of your workers, realizing that some of the other elements that would be ECAP accredited can be added later on as you eventually work towards compliance, and maybe you get to the size where you're ready to be accredited. Jeremy, what would you add for a small church? Where do you start, and what do you do first?
I mean, On Guard was gold to us. That book is tattered at this point because we just referred to it so much. And I know that ECAP gave away 17 million billion copies at T4G, well worth every bit of it. That book should be your starting point. It is great if you're either new into this, or you want to, honestly, if you want to take what you have and just kind of review it against On Guard, it will help you see things that you might not have thought of on your own. And that book is a gold mine. I would consult other churches as well. Reach out to seasoned churches that are like-minded. Honestly, reach out to churches that aren't like-minded. They might have some really great things that they're doing that you want to implement, not necessarily on the curriculum side, but on the policy side. What is the way that they structure? If you can take a break from a Sunday morning and go, contact another church, go to that children's ministry on a Sunday morning and just ask to observe, and just say, hey, I'm really working hard here. we're in ministry together, y'all. This is a big global church that we are trying to bring the love of Jesus into these walls. And so reach out to other churches. Everybody should be glad to at least offer some assistance, even if they can't provide you with documents. You can at least kind of get a glimpse at them and see how they operate.
Yeah, any of these resources, if you're not sure where to turn, if you need help making a connection or comparing products and services from a number of vendors, contact us. We're glad to help make some connections or point you in the right direction. I'm going to ask or answer a couple questions related to accreditation, cost, next steps, and what happens if an ECAP accredited member has some sort of moral failure. That's the language in a question that we received. So first of all, as I'd mentioned earlier, we're running trials of our accreditation program right now with a number of ministries across the country, and different ministry types, multiple campuses, schools, a combination of all the above. Camp ministries, and we're learning tons from the experience, and we're developing resources to help expedite your process for if and when you'll be accredited. And so that's all in the works now, but plan to stay connected to our ministry through subscribing to updates and checking on our website. But we're planning to launch the full accreditation program come January with a full press release in December at some point. So what will this cost? In order to tap into the benefits for our association-based ministry and our affiliated members, that will provide discounted resources and in some cases free resources to our members, and then to be able to display that kind of good housekeeping seal of an accredited member. It's membership based, so you're going to pay annual dues. I mentioned the $300 application fee, and then after you're accredited, your membership dues are going to be kind of in these categories. For a small ministry, you're looking on the low side of $500 each year. For a medium-sized organization, you might be around $1,000 or $1,500. And then on the very, very high side, membership rates will probably be on the high side around $3,500, and that would be for a very large church with multiple divisions, multiple campuses, and those are some of the factors that we look at when determining membership rates. So, you know, a 9-campus church that has 17,000 people and a school is going to be that high side. Those are the factors that increase ECAP's ability to have auditors come to your location. Of course, I mentioned the auditors that are super important to who we are and what we do. We're not planning to have any sort of centralized full-time auditors, but we're planning to tap into folks just like you. And we believe that that not only keeps our expenses low by having regionally based auditors, but it actually benefits the church and Christian ministries as a whole. So for example, Jeremy shared about going and doing other audits, and we've already seen the benefits of you going to another ministry, learning about what they do, taking that knowledge back home, at the same time auditing them is a tremendous benefit to ministries across the country. And so we plan on building that group of auditors to conduct those audits regionally based. And so if you're interested there, be sure to click on the link in the chat, learn more, and apply. You can see some of the prerequisites there. What other expenses are related to an audit? Well, remember I said every other year, those 2 auditors would come to your ministry location and conduct an on-site audit. And there would be minimal travel expenses related to those auditors visiting. So that would be reimbursable to ECAP for those travel expenses. Now, again, we expect those travel expenses to remain low so long as we have auditors across the country. So, right, we're trying to avoid flying someone from Los Angeles to Florida to audit, right? We're trying to keep folks regionally based. That helps us keep expenses low. I hope that helps answer that question. Another question we had was, what do we do when maybe there's an abuse allegation from an ECAP accredited member organization? Great question. Remember, we're peer-based, and so there are policies and procedures related to this. You can read them in detail if you are interested under the document library on our website. In particular, there will be a committee of the council that this particular committee has not been formed yet, but will. And they will have a handful of members on a committee that will review. This committee will not conduct investigations. ECAP will never do an investigation, but we will review the results of an investigation for internal abuse that may have taken place at a member organization. So the results of that investigation would be shared with this committee. They would evaluate the situation in conjunction with, or in a collaboration with, our general counsel, our attorney for ECAP, and then make recommendations to the ECAP board that would make rulings on the membership status of that organization. Now, everything I said is carefully worded, right? Because again, we don't do investigations. The worst thing that ECAP can do is unaccredit you, right? There's no force that's going to go make you be accredited. So you're either accredited or you're not, as far as what what happens to you if something takes place. And so we'll carefully look at those instances where abuse has taken place. We want to learn from those. We know that abuse is going to take place, just statistically speaking, God forbid, right? We know it's going to take place, but when it does take place, ECAP wants to work together with our member organizations to learn from that incident. Is it something? These are the questions we'd be asking. Was there a policy or procedure that wasn't followed, and that's where abuse took place? Maybe we need to actually improve the ECAP standards. Maybe there's policies and procedures that need to be improved on. And so this is really where the value of the association-based model is intended to help all of the members. So what we can do is we can learn from that abuse situation and share the results, not the sensitive information about what took place, right? But we can share the results of the findings with all of our members to help you learn from something that took place at another ministry. Right now, there's no mechanism to do that, to share those principles and to share those lessons learned with other ministries. So we believe one of the big values that ECAP will bring to keeping kids safe is sharing the appropriate information and then potentially modifying our standards as technologies and other advancements become available in the area of child protection. We plan to monitor those and to share those with you so that you can improve along with other ministries that are committed to these things. I hope that's helpful. Jeremy, anything that you'd add to what I just shared? He's muted. Can you unmute yourself?
I can. Figured y'all had heard enough of me. Yeah, the only thing, I think everything you said is fantastic. As far as getting started, the only other thing I could think of that I didn't say was there is a book called Build on Jesus. Hey, look, it's blurred out. All right, well, can't show that. Hey, it's by Deepak Raju and Marty Machowski, but they came out with this book called Build on Jesus. It's all about children's ministry, but there's chapters 4 and 5 that if you are getting started, whether you have great leadership who's on board, ready to say, yes, let's go, and whether you have leadership that can sometimes be more difficult to work with. Chapter 4 and 5 should be read together from ministry leader and pastor elder. Chapter 4 is addressed to the pastor, explaining his role as far as leading leaders. And the chapter 5 is the role of a ministry leader and the tasks that we have been given also. And so it's a really great way to get this process started once you have decided, hey, this is something I want. Those 2 chapters, if you pick up that book and just look at chapters 4 and 5 to get started, I think it'd be a great way for your church to get rolling toward ECAP.
Well, we're going to land the plane here. We're just a couple minutes away from the promised conclusion here. I told you 5:30 here on the East Coast, we'd have a hard stop, but we want to continue to serve you, your church, your school, your ministry in helping keep kids safe so that we can advance the Great Commission. That's really why we're here. This is not just about accreditation, but it's really about keeping kids safe, as Jeremy said earlier. You know, one of the best ways to keep kids safe is equipping parents. And so we are in conversations to develop more resources to help parents talk to their kids about a number of things, but appropriate touch and interaction and communication is important. Check out this resource from Julie Lowe at CCEF on ways to help your parents and parents protecting their kids from abuse. Julie Lowe just came out with a fantastic book. I've got it sitting here called Safeguards from New Growth Press, and we are working feverishly to get our hands on a number of copies and to give them out to many of you, probably through the application process. I think what we'll do is once you apply, we'll send you a free copy of this book, Safeguards by Julie Lowe, which is intended to equip parents on the front lines of keeping kids safe, because we believe that parents have such a vital role in talking to their kids about child protection. So that's a little bit about us, and we're so thankful that you spent an hour and a half with us to learn more about keeping kids safe. I hope it's been helpful. If there's anything else that we can do to serve you, Jesse's put his contact information in the chat. I've shared my email address. Contact us through the website. We're here to support you. Jeremy Herron, thank you so much for taking time to be with us, sharing your experience. Thanks for all of your support and encouragement as we create ECAP to help ministries across the country and around the world. Thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
All right, everybody. Well, we're going to do another webinar kind of like this one in January. So if you have a ministry contact, help us spread the word. If you don't mind, maybe pass along our contact information or our website so that we can serve other churches and other Christian ministries in your community. That's why we exist. And so continue to visit our website, subscribe for updates on new resources and articles that are coming out every month. And stay tuned as we prepare to launch. We covet your prayers, and of course, consider if the Lord leads you to financially to make all of this possible. A number of free resources that we've already shared and more in the works requires the generous support financially and your prayers to make all of this possible. So consider that as we leave today. I hope it's been helpful. Have a great weekend. God bless you all. Take care. Bye-bye.